Hello, thank you for tuning into my channel. This is the second video in a series of scraps, organization, and usage. So if you want to see how I use some square scraps in my quilts, please stay tuned. This is going to be a very exciting video. I am so happy that I get to share with you about how I use my scraps in new quilts. It's a lot of fun to take those scraps, those small pieces that are left over from other projects, and then transform them into completely different ideas, completely different new projects. Over the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about different types of scraps that I collect. I do squares in a variety of sizes. I do strips in a variety of sizes, and I do teeny tiny pieces that I call crumbs. So we're going to be going over some different ways to use all of those in the next few weeks. Today, our focus is on squares, and I love using squares as a part of my quilting. Here I have some squares that I have cut. These are my what I consider scrap squares. They're basically free fabric that I've cut after I've made other projects. I collect them in the sizes of 2.5 inches. These are my 2.5 inch squares, and they're generally by color. And then I have 5 inch squares that I only separate into lights and darks. And then I also do 10 inch squares, and I haven't been collecting those very long, so I just have a small stack of them, but I will go over some ways that I've used 10 inch squares to create new quilts or new parts of quilts. So today we're just going to talk about how you can take these squares and turn them into other projects. So we're going to start just really simply by sewing two squares together. And when you do that, you can get little pieces like this. And I was doing this as kind of a leader ender project. And so I have several different twosies or two sets, two patches that I have been collecting. And these two patches can eventually become larger blocks. And so there are several ways that you can do that. I'm going to go from smallest unit to biggest unit. So you can start with your two patches and turn them into four patches. And all of mine are color paired with a light, but you don't have to do that. You can make them completely random, completely scrappy if you want to. These are some examples of some four patches that I've created. And I like these because I'm going to put them in another block that I'll share with you later. But it's just four squares that are stitched together. On these, I start by pressing it to the dark side, but then afterwards I swirl my seams so they all go the same way. So you can see that little tiny four patch in the middle. That is from where I have swirled my seams, which basically makes all of the seams go in the same direction. So these are just two examples of some four patches. These are 2.5 inch squares used in four patches. You can also make 9 patches, and I have some 9 patches here that I was doing with my 5 inch squares. So, and you can still see hopefully the lights and the colors. So I have in this patch, I have 4 lights and 5 colors. But I also have some with 5 lights and 4 colors, like that one. And what I'm doing with these, my plan is to eventually make a quilt as you go project that uses these 9 patches. So I have several here. And a cool thing about a 4 patch or a 9 patch is when you put it in a large project, it can create a chain effect going through the quilt. So I'll show you just a few of these. So this one's dark on the outside, light on the outside, a light on the outside. Along with the 9 patches and the 4 patches, once you have those techniques down, you can start expanding your chain look in your quilt blocks by creating 16 patches, 25 patches, and so on. So one thing that I've done, or I've started, is to create these postage stamp blocks. And I recently made a video about these blocks, and I will put it in the description box. This is just a 36 patch. So it is 36 squares that I've joined together. Again, I start by pairing a light square with a color square. This one is a rainbow setting, but I've also done them with primarily one color. I'll grab one here. This one is primarily with pinks. So you can do things like this and then use them to create one large quilt. If I use these will finish about 12.5 inches. So if I have 20 blocks, I can have a nice baby quilt. If I have 30 blocks, I can have a 60 by 72 quilt. So really good fun. And I don't know if I said it, but I used 2.5 inch pieces for this block, 2.5 inch squares for these blocks, and they turn out so cute. And so I enjoy those. Now, so far we've talked about the 2.5 inch squares a little bit. We've talked about how I've used 5 inch squares. I will put a picture in here. I actually made a t-shirt quilt with that checkerboard pattern. I'll put a picture of that quilt here so you can see what it looks like as a large quilt, something like this. I think in that setting, I used 16 square blocks. So just a lot of fun, a lot of things to create. Now, if you have spare 10-inch squares and you're not sure what to do, you can take any of the ideas that I've shared so far. You can cut those 10-inch squares down to 5-inch squares, down to 2.5-inch squares, and create some of these blocks. You can also use them as big as large squares, where you simply just sew them together. And I will show a couple of instances where I did that, because I use 10-inch squares as quilt backing. And I'll show it here. This is the front of the quilt first. It's a trip around the world quilt that I did. And then on the back, I cut 10-inch squares from my stash and created a quilt back. So you'll see that here in the video. And when you do that, when I did that, it was a lot of fun because it's really easy piecing. And you don't have to, it comes together quickly. You don't have to worry about it taking a really, really long time because the squares are so large. So those are 3 ways that you can use squares. Another way to use squares is to create other blocks with those squares. So one block that I love creating is the half square triangle. Let me see. I think I have one here. Let me grab it. Okay. And I won't necessarily, well, I'll show you, I'll talk you through how to make this. What I did is I took one 5-inch square of each of these fabrics, turned them over on this light one. I drew a line diagonally, and then I stitched from corner to corner. So from one 5-inch square of each color, you actually get 2 half square triangle blocks. And these are a lot of fun because you can put them together as a 4-patch like we talked about earlier, and you can get a variety of patterns, including pinwheel, including hourglass. There are lots of different shapes that you can create when you put these half square triangles in 4 patches. This is a lot of fun to do when you have a lot of you have 4 patches of half square triangles. There are a lot of different ways to put these together. What I like to do with my half square triangles, what I've been doing lately, is combining the half square triangle block with the 4-patch. And so one way, there are several ways you can do it. I've been using mine as a 9-patch to create the Jacob's Ladder block. And I've done this with 5-inch squares and 2.5-inch squares here. And then in this larger quilt behind me, I used 10-inch squares for the half square triangle and 5-inch squares for the 4 patches. So you can see that there's so many different ways to put these different blocks together. If you have extra 2.5-inch squares, 5-inch squares, 10-inch squares, whatever size square you're holding on to or that you have, you can use it to create some of these looks. To add one more way that I've used my 2.5-inch scrap squares, I created a letter panel with these 25 squares. I used color squares and background squares to create it. And then in 2 of these blocks, I created a half square triangle, just like we've been talking about. This is just one other bonus way to add some pizzazz to your quilts. If you want to use some extra smaller squares, you can make panels some like of these looks. Now, I won't even say that this is an exhaustive list, because it's not. There are so many different ways to use squares in quilts, and all you would have to do is search it in whatever your browser is, or search it on YouTube. Ways to use scrap 2.5-inch squares, ways to use scrap charm pack squares. There are lots of different ways that you can do that. So feel free to search it out on your own. This is just a really quick video to show some ways that I've used these squares in my projects. And there are even more ways, because I would love to combine these looks with the strips that we talk about next week to get some even more great quilt looks. Again, so many different ways to use it. This is just a small sample of what I've done. If you have any questions about what you've seen in this video, leave them in the comments below. Thumbs up this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.